Salute, I am Ruminous, and today we are doing a review for Crash Bandicoot 1. Although this is particularly for the remake, the original and the remake are almost one-to-one, so this review will be applicable to the original as well, even though the remake does have some changes to it that negatively impact the game, and I'll specifically point those out when we get to them. Crash Bandicoot is a game about a bandicoot who despises boxes. This marsupial has been biogenetically designed to make boxes extinct in return for shiny gems. Crash jumps and falls through jungles, tall towers, Sisyphean hells where the bridges never allow escape, and evil scientist labs. The whole motivation behind the game is that a crazy scientist is using animals to try and make an army or something for world domination, but Crash escapes and decides to try and save sexy Bandicoot lady. The time to complete this game is entirely dependent on the skill and knowledge of certain secrets, although the remake will have tips on screen to help. It took me about 5 hours to beat the game 100%, but may take others longer if they're not used to platformers, and there are time trials for each level that I refuse to do because I have some respect for myself. Not a lot, but I don't like speedruns, and I don't want to deal with these or the bridges again. The controls are quite consistent across the game, and it is rare for a command to be ignored. It will sometimes happen, but it's pretty rare. The first game has the least controls. Move, jump, and spin. It makes the game simple, although it is by no means easy. The player cannot cancel spins, but can stop moving immediately or stop pressing jump to do smaller hops. There is no limit or pause for Crash to repeat, change, or combine actions. There are plenty of opportunities for lives and checkpoints to help the player retry, which they will have to do for these stupid towers that last 19 years and have completely ignored all construction laws for railings. Giant birds are not a suitable replacement for stairs. The game has no planned latency or delay when initiating an action, but does have a delay when repeating actions. Crash will need to land in order to jump again, which is absolutely unrealistic. Apparently, Naughty Dog did not do the research that marsupials can defy gravity. Crash will also need to stop spinning before he can spin again. The actions are repeated throughout the entire game. There are plenty of boxes that need to be slapped apart, and these turtles have insulted Crash's shoes one too many times. The levels have a concerning amount of broken walkways and slippery escalators that require leaps of faith. The three actions are each useful in the game. The levels have a plethora of enemies, platforms, and boxes which require each action. Spinning is more useful than jumping on things as it has a wider radius of attack, but stomping on these horrific crates that want to eradicate the human race is still a viable option. The player has pretty much full autonomy to replay levels, do time travels, or move forward in the game. The player does have to watch Crash get massacred by the insidious boxes that the player foolishly let live at the end of each level. Even though it only takes a minute or so, most levels cannot be fully purged of the crate menace until the very end of the game, so it can get annoying. The character's movement is fluid and very linear. You know how fast Crash will go until he hits ice and goes turbo mode off this malicious bridge. The major issue is that Crash does not often jump high enough or far enough to make most simple jumps without going to the edge of each platform. The original did not have this problem, but this game constantly has Crash scrape his shins on the ledges as the platforms are just too far away. Making Crash jump slightly higher, move slightly faster, or redesign the levels to match the movement would have fixed this issue. The camera is fixed behind and above Crash and will continuously move along with the character as he moves in a fully 3D environment, although there are some strictly 2D environments in the game. There are a few times where the player will need to backtrack for boxes, and the camera is pretty limiting, but that is a clear design choice rather than an oversight. The view keeps Crash in the center of the frame, but he only takes up about 10% of the view, which gives enough to see when a piranha will paint your garage. The game grows in terms of difficulty for platforming and complexity in the boxes or secrets. There are some secrets in the later levels and some challenges with the colored gems to make the game have enough variety so that it isn't just running through the jungle with reckless slaughter to these boxes. The crates will begin to put up a fight later on and make alliances with the robots, so beware of that. The game is a pretty linear flow, but will hit odd spikes and dips where it is either far too annoying, look at you stupid bridges, or oddly easy in the later levels. The levels are generally pretty short, but some of the tower levels will take 45 minutes to beat just based on how much land there is. The colored gems required no death runs, which can easily take a long time to do, and some of the bosses take forever to kill for no reason. Generally, it grows reasonably with adding more jumps, enemies, and making the timing more strict to allow the player to get accustomed over the course of the game. Since the colored gems are all at the end of the game, most levels will need to be replayed, sometimes for just a few boxes, which is just a needless hassle. Although subjective based on the experience of the player, I would declare Crash 1 a rather difficult game, even ignoring the remake's blunder with the jumps. The no death runs, bridge levels, tower levels, and tight timing later on can make the game annoying or daunting. In the era that it was made, platformers were all the rage, so the players would be accustomed to the brutality, but I do believe that Crash needed some attunement to make it less frustrating and more challenging. The challenges, style, and nature of the game give the initial playthrough a good sustainability, although there are some levels that will probably turn players away. Although I've been joking about the bridge levels, they are notorious notorious for just being cheap, even in the original, and many people lament replaying these levels. The initial playthrough suffers from this, probably loses some players' interest, and also prevents players from replaying the game. It is replayability and is good for personal challenges, but the rough edges make it less likely to happen. The story is as basic as it comes. Evil scientist Neocortex decides to biologically modify living animals in an attempt for world domination, makes a goof, and Crash escapes. Crash decides to try and stop Neo while also going after Marilyn Monroe Bandicoot. The game doesn't have a complex story, and it doesn't need one. It's about an orange rabbit thing smashing boxes and getting gems. Who cares what else is going on in the world? The story doesn't take itself seriously and is basically just there as a requirement on the game making rubric. The music is pretty spectacular. It fits with the themes of the levels, where bongos are used in the jungle, synths are in the secret labs, and high-pitched screeches with demonic chants are used for the bridges. The music is pretty catchy, simple, and fun. It can definitely help calm a player's mood after the stupid turtle kills him for the 13th time, but it's not my fault. The turtles have suffered enough, and I don't want to hurt them anymore. The sounds in the game are cartoonish to match with the style. The spin sounds like a DJ, the jump sounds like a spring, the fire sounds like a flamethrower, things like that. The sounds are clear, well-designed, and sync with the animations, and easy to detect from off-screen. The mechanics definitely struggle to be reliable. Crash will often slip off with edges that he clearly landed on. The levels will have, at times, obnoxious sections, tight timing and only select parts, or just be so much more difficult than the levels before and after it. Generally, the design and changes can be trusted to follow a stable path, but it will definitely go off-road and try to steal your gummy worms for really no reason. Crash has a few manipulatives, most of which are assistive, as they figured out that some of these levels will smash your rocks. If the player dies about 5 to 7 times before beating the level or reaching the next checkpoint, Crash will then receive a mask so that he can take another hit. In levels where deaths are often caused by falling in pits, this is useless, as they should have figured out a better method for those levels. Eventually, the game will also give a golden mask for 2 hits and change the regular boxes to checkpoints to give more checkpoints in the level. There are not many assistives, but there is one big one where the game will reset the cycles of the moving platforms and enemies, and a cycle is when something repeats its animation. So it has point A, B, and C, it'll go through A, B, C, and then go back to A as a cycle in a circle. And they do this so that the player can plan a route accordingly after death and figure out the best pattern of movement, rather than having to wait each death for the correct moment for it to get back to point A so that they can retry their attempt. There are a few detrimental mechanics, some of which help to make the game harder, others make it more frustrating. Certain enemies can only be eliminated by spinning, others only by jumping. This helps make it so that Crash has to diversify his moves and not just steamroll through the game. Some enemies can't be killed at all, where they become instead a moving hazard. In the remake, because it is more rounded and not polygonal, Crash will slip off of edges if he lands on the very edge as it moves away from him. Because of the original was strictly all squares, this was not a mechanic, but the new tech came with this problem, and it can cause a bunch of unnecessary or unfair deaths in the later levels. There are also bosses who, although not hard, will sometimes have a lot of health and just simply take too much time to defeat. The levels and enemies are designed with great guiding mechanics to help the player figure out secrets, where to go, and what not to attack. Enemies with spikes on the back should not be jumped on. The puffs of fire from the flowers is a clear warning, and I have no idea what this green stuff is, but it looks gross. The levels are generally straightforward, but some have secret pathways that can easily be detected if the player is paying attention to certain enemies or the design of the background. Since there is hardly any dialogue, the design relies on being intuitive to help the player understand the game. The initial controls are taught, but many of the mechanics need to be learned. Based on the slow pace and open areas of the first levels, the player should figure out that the enemies are in hazards or in cycles, that the enemies will not return once stopped into oblivion, that there are checkpoints, that getting all the crates will give the player a gem for that level. Despite how much I hate the bridge levels, they are designed intuitively well, where the first red plank, which falls when stepped on, is in between 2 stable planks, so the player won't die when stepping on it, but will learn that the red planks will drop. Since this game was designed with hardly any dialogue, it was designed with intuitives, and I think that the colors, animation, and model clearly show the different parts of the game. There aren't many thematic mechanics, but there is enough story that the player can make the assumption that these giant creatures are made from Neocortex as well, and that these evil towers were built by him as well. The game is meant to be goofy and not taken seriously, but what is in the game makes some sense within the story. The first level is designed to give the player enough room to roam around and see what the game has to offer. Crash spins with the force of a vortex, despises crates with every quirk of his being, and these turtles have some strong opinions about personal space. The player should see and react to the different types of boxes and understand how the levels will proceed. The tutorial, despite directly telling the player the controls, is well designed and concise. The UI and UX in the game is properly designed with contrasting colors and decent empty space. The UI is comprised of a pause menu where the player can quit, resume, or go into options, but also has a separate section to see the percent progress in the game. The menu options are simple and logical. The text is bubbly and easily legible with a black outline and orange filling. The overall design of the colors, background, and foreground are easy to decipher, and the player should have no problem navigating the levels or determining what is an enemy, hazard, or platform. The remake changes the unsettling animations of the first game to more fluid and realistic, at least for humanoid Bandicoot. The graphics have been upped significantly to make it much more detailed and beautiful, and even though the style is cartoonish and outlandish, everything looks unique, distinguishable, and more importantly, funny in the proper way. Just like in the original, there are so many unique death animations which make the game feel much more alive and can relieve the stress of falling into a pit for the 10th time while Crash's shoes rocket up to the sky. The animations are often lively, exacerbated, or just straight bananas. The spin move is literally a tornado, but it's hilarious and it makes sense for why Crash can shatter boxes, although his shins should become Twizzlers. Any slow motion is much more realistic, but faster movements are exaggerated to fit the style. Crash 1 has a slight struggle with accessibility, but I don't believe that it's impossible for most players. The game has tight timing and plenty of moving hazards, but there's not so much on screen that it causes cognitive overload. The colors are different enough for the platforms, enemies, and hazards that those with colorblindness should be able to decipher them. The font can't be changed, but it is big, bubbly, and scarce enough with decent kerning that it shouldn't be an issue for reading or lexical comprehension. Despite the challenge in the game, the enemies will often not cross a certain line, and so players can wait and plan if needed, although many gems or enemies will require some depth perception. The game can be hard and may not be good for those with issues to reactions, but it is a fun and goofy game that offers some respite between the fast-paced sections. For our final score, I give the gameplay a 26 out of 35, story 4 out of 5, sound 5 out of 5, mechanics 26 out of 30, tutorial 4 out of 5, UI UX 5 out of 5, graphics 5 out of 5, and accessibility 4 out of 5. Overall, I'll give the game a 4 out of 5. Crash 1 is a difficult and also frustrating game and rough around the edges, but also the first real game from Naughty Dog. The Crash series would go on to be absolutely amazing, but the first game does have some issues that the later entries don't, but it's still a great game that is a must-play for platformer gamers. It will be a struggle and annoying for gamers who don't lean towards platformers, but I do believe that the vast majority of gamers would enjoy this game. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified of future videos. But until next time, wale te omnes.